So hi, my name is Katerina, and I'm the Director of User Experience here at Habanero. And today I'm with Barb, who's one of our information architects, and we're going to be talking about content strategy as one of our trends to watch in UE. So just to dive on in. Okay, so what do you want to say about the trend?
So the trend of content strategy that I'd like to talk about is, one, is just how pervasive it is right now. If you follow web design blogs or sites, and how much people are talking about it in the field. And the other thing to note of it is just how different we deal with content now than we did a few years ago.
Okay, so let's start with that then. What are those differences?
So the big one is just how much we think about content earlier and more often than we used to. A few years ago, it was kind of a matter of course that we did our IA, we did our design, and we packaged our site up, and then we were finished, and it was usually up to the client to deal with the content of the site. We don't do that anymore at all anymore. We think about content early on. Another contrast is that a few years ago, our wireframes were full of lorem ipsum and placeholder text. Now, we never do that anymore. We always make sure we've got real content and all the things that we're delivering. We do a content audit up front, and as we're doing our IA, we do the content much more in parallel with the IA rather than at the end. A lot more planning for it, and we work with the client a lot more to get them ready for all the content that's coming. And I think the big change has been that, the analogy I think of is that it's like a few years ago, if you had a restaurant, you were designing your restaurant and thinking it's going to work there and about your service and your ambiance, and then you didn't think about your food until the end. And I think people's use of the internet, we're mature enough now to realize how important content is. And now I think we do think of content the same way someone who owns a restaurant thinks about food to their restaurant.
Right, and so to that point, we're not talking just about writing, right?
No, I mean, text definitely is the big one, but it's really what are you delivering to people visiting your site or your intranet, and what do they need to know, and what do they need to use. But yeah, it could be anything from images to video to text to animation.
Yeah, absolutely. And people having an idea around community building, and the idea that it isn't just, going back to your earlier point, it's something that requires a strategy. It's not just, oh, hey, just write this thing or pull it from our brochure and stick it on the website, because the results are going to obviously show that lack of preparation.
Yeah, and actually to the point about the social about informal content and social content, is I do like that analogy of the restaurant quite a bit, because you do need a strategy. And some restaurants, the food is more potluck. You think of social networking sites, but that is a strategy, and you've decided to get your food that way. And some sites are more formal, and it's like you have maybe a more formal chef, you know. But in either case, you do need to plan for it. And I mean, I think a lot of sites, especially intranets, they're a bit more on the potluck side, right? There's like a lot of different authors, and that probably requires more planning and thinking than anything, because what's worse than a badly planned potluck, right?
Everybody brings lasagna.
Yeah, and they're bad. And who do you want to do your potluck, right? You want people that have had some training in cooking, right? They've got like some guidelines, and that you plan to not get all desserts or all something, and so it definitely requires planning.
Yeah. So what are the roles that you would probably see sort of involved in content strategy?
Well, the big one is IA for sure. The BA does tend to get involved in different parts of it. It seems to be a really natural extension of the IA role. If you think of the IA's role as, does a lot of user research, figures out what people need to see on a page and when. The structure, how it's organized, it's a really natural step to take that one step further, and what are people actually going to read, and where is that content going to come from? More and more, I find it really hard to do the IA without really getting into the content of things, and of course what happens as soon as you do an IA and then you do the content, what happens with the IA changes. So for me, the two of those really fit together. They really are two pieces of a puzzle that go together, and they also remind me of content strategy in IA. To me is very much the house and the furniture, the furniture fitting into the house, and they go together in that way. But the BA does, if you think of the BA doing things like, what are the preconditions that need to take place in order for content to get on the page, some of the authoring requirements around the page, where does content go, some of our BAs do help with content planning and migration.
Cool, and so do you have some concrete examples of how a deliverable, there's an impact if you're taking content strategy into account?
Yeah, so when we present wireframes, we like to present the wireframes in parallel with all the content associated with that. And in one recent example, we like to show what the wireframe is going to look like if the content doesn't get cleaned up, and then with the wireframe with what happens if you're going to invest in editing and cleaning up your content. And that's a pretty good way of showing people what that really means, good content and not good content. The other good thing is, in usability testing, if you keep your ears perked up, there's a lot of times really some quite good and compelling quotes and things people say in usability testing that illustrate how important the content is to them.
And what would you say is the number one challenge associated with trying to take a content strategy approach?
I think the number one challenge is actually getting people to invest the time and money in it. I don't think anyone argues with how important it is, but in one client we have now, they really appreciate how important content is, but that's going to require a lot of content owners doing a lot of work, and so it is an investment of time. And it reminds me a lot of how usability testing was about 5 years ago, in that everybody knew how important it was, but it was a different story to get them to actually invest time in it.
Well, so how would you wrap up this segment in terms of advice for people who are in web design?
Well, if you haven't already started to get familiar with what content strategy is, I would say it would be good to start learning about it, and then also thinking about it as early as possible in your project. And something that's been a book that's been popular in our office is this book, Content Strategy for the Web. We've also lent it to clients, and a couple of them have really appreciated it. This is probably one of your best starting points.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Barb. And thank you for tuning in for